الله أكبر الله أكبر.
They were all quite well off. They didn't have to do anything, but they had this sense of fellow feeling for their co-religionists. Now we are in the strong room. And this is a strong room where we aim to keep it fireproof and flood-free, inshallah. Our archives are the only place where we have any remaining information about them because they have gone, they've faded away.
Dr Jamil, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the ELM Podcast. There's a few questions I wanted just to ask you about. I'm really intrigued in learning about the ELM Archives and all of your experience and your history with dealing with the ELM Archives. This is a very unique project, one that many mosques, if not East London Mosque, is the only mosque that has an archive within its premises. So just to begin with, what exactly is an archive and how would you explain its importance to someone who hasn't come across one before?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the East London Mosque Archives, which is something dear to my heart. I'd like to begin by responding to some of your questions. Firstly, what is an archive and what's its significance? Now, an archive is a collection of historical documents that are properly managed and catalogued and made available to historians, to scholars, to researchers. And here at the East London Mosque, we have quite a unique collection, as you were saying, perhaps 100,000 documents going back to 1910.
Wow.
So that's over 110 years old.
Wow.
And what we have in these documents are the records, the observations, the information about the personalities of all the people who have been involved in the East London Mosque and its associated bodies. So we start with the London Mosque Fund in 1910, and then the unique, maybe the first Muslim charity in this country, the Indigent Muslim Burials Fund in 1925. Then we have the Jamiat Muslimeen, started in 1934, which was very instrumental in setting up the East London Mosque on Commercial Road. And from the 1940s, the East London Mosque Trust. So we have, alhamdulillah, inherited a vast collection of documents, and I personally feel it is our amana, it is our responsibility to keep it safe for future generations. Now, coming up to your other point about what is the significance of an archive, I think there are perhaps three important reasons. Firstly, I think the stories of our elders are inspirational. We learn about their sacrifices, their selfless conduct for decades. And also, I think very interestingly, there are many examples of what I would call smart leadership, which we can benefit from today and can help us in the future. I think the other important reason is that a story of British social history cannot be written unless it weaves in the Muslim social history.
For sure.
So really, preserving the Muslim historical record is important for the writing of a complete, comprehensive British history. Another reason, closer to home, is that when we look at how far back our roots go, it gives us a sense of belonging. Okay, we belong here. We are not going anywhere. Right? So that's in very broad terms what the East London Mosque Archives contains, its significance, why we spend time on it, and maybe when we go through and visit the archives, I could give you some specific examples. Thank you, Nathan.
No, thank you, Dr. Jamil, and that's really interesting, and I really love, the point about kind of preserving the history in order to kind of show the future generations and the experiences and, how the archives kind of preserve that is a means of helping the future generations navigate the challenges that exist within the world or specifically within this society. So maybe kind of honing in a bit on that, why do archives matter for Muslims in Britain today? And what makes it so important to preserve these records as part of our history?
Yes. So I think one of the reasons is that we don't have an archival culture in Muslim civil society. And while the generation who pioneered our mosques, built our schools, established our cemeteries, they are gradually fading away. And it is so important that we preserve their history. And their history then is in committee minutes, in correspondence, their dealings with local government. And if we don't preserve that, we will not be able to acknowledge that contribution and on what is the basis on which we are standing on today. They laid the foundations. And we hear stories of elders passing away and their records not looked after, being lost. Very fortunately, East London Mosque, we have been associated with some elders who have been meticulous in keeping records. And I really want to give tribute to some of their names, which we could come to later.
Okay.
So I think it's important to create an archival culture within Muslim civil society so that we can write our history. And also we can write our history from our perspective. A lot of the history is often written, history is always written from a perspective. So you can someone who is interested in Afro-Caribbean history, someone interested in Black history, and other points of view. But it's important for Muslims to write their own history because we will be sensitive. Our antenna will be out. But what are the issues which really matter?
Yeah, no, and that kind of point of, taking ownership of the history that has existed, like you said, for over a millennium, like over 110 years is so vitally important in kind of helping the community continue to exist and having that kind of awareness, I think, of the importance of these things. And hopefully we can kind of discuss that a bit more. And maybe Dr. Jamil, if you can kind of give us some insight into the origins of the project and why did the East London Mosque decide to begin its own archives project and how has it developed over time?
Yes. So the project really crystallized when it came to the centenary of the London Mosque Fund in 2010. And Dr. Muhammad Abdul Bari, who was the chair of trustees at the time, he mentioned it to a professor at Queen Mary College that this is coming up. And we have some rare documents. We have the minutes book of the London Mosque Fund. And through that network, we were very fortunate to get Professor Humayun Ansari to write a book about the East London Mosque minutes book. And really that put us on the map. At that time also, we didn't have a proper storage for our minutes, for our records. So we spent some time trying to collate all the documents. So there were some on the roof of East London Mosque in the tin hut. There were some behind the mimbar. There were some in people's houses. So gradually they were brought together and they were placed in a storage area. Then we, thanks to really the dynamism of people like Salahuddin Halim, we were able to raise funds for a purpose-built strong room, which we can see later. So that's where they are preserved. And also the East London Mosque trustees have been very supportive, which also makes it quite a unique institution across Europe. I don't think there's another mosque which has a strong room of this type. And we actually have a professional archivist who comes in 2 days a week to do the cataloging work, to supervise the researchers. And there are very few professional Muslim archivists, and we are fortunate to have one of them coming here part-time.
MashaAllah. Yeah, no, that's brilliant to hear, Dr. Jamil, and to kind of know about the uniqueness of East London Mosque to have its own kind of archive system is really, I think, really important for people to hear and know. But maybe this is also a good opportunity to ask about your background, Dr. Jamil, and can you tell us a bit about yourself and your involvement with this amazing project you mentioned before in the introduction, how this is your passion, like where does all of this energy for archives come from?
Right. So I'm not a professional archivist, so I would describe myself as an archive activist. My career has been in something quite different, in data analysis, but there's an overlap between data management and keeping records. And also, my interest is in biographical writing. So I have written about Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the 20th century translator and commentator of the Quran. And it was very interesting to find that there were documents about Abdullah Yusuf Ali in the East London Mosque Archives, because he corresponded with the Jamiat Muslimeen. He helped the London Mosque, East London Mosque Trust. He delivered khutbahs on Eid prayers. So that was like a natural bridge between my interests as a biography writer and the East London Mosque archive. And then over the years, I've been fortunate to be part of a working group, a steering committee. We were lucky or fortunate to obtain a grant from the National Archives for employing a professional cataloguer for 1 year, which then led to an online catalogue as well. And subsequently, we got another grant to preserve the London Mosque Fund minutes book, which was falling apart. So we have been helped, and I think the archival community is a very supportive one. They recognize the value of these archives, and we have been able to draw on a lot of goodwill, particularly from the National Archives and the Tower Hamlets Archives and Heritage Unit, headed by Tamsin Buki. So over the years, I've been involved in various development of the archives, including the launch of the Strong Room, where we had the Mayor of London coming. And more recently, we have been lucky to get deposits from other sources which have enriched the archive, and we can talk about those as well.
Yeah, that would be fantastic to hear. And can you give us some insight, Dr. Jamil, in terms of inside the archive? And when you open the Strong Room, what kind of materials are actually there, and what can people expect to find in the East London Mosque archive?
Right. So I think I need to take you down, Nathan,
of course,
which we shall do shortly. So we are here in the basement of East London Mosque, and we have an area where we keep the archives of the mosque. They are kept behind the steel door, which is always locked. And if we go inside, now we are in the Strong Room. And this is a strong room where we aim to keep it fireproof and flood-free, inshallah. And we are adhering to the archival standards. And also we monitor the humidity and the temperature. Here we have the stacks where we keep our archives. If I could open one of these stacks. So here you will see the grey boxes. These are acid-free boxes in which we keep the archive documents. Each box has a catalogue number, and this catalogue number can then be accessed via a website which will give us the contents of the box. So researchers can have online access to the catalogue. We have not yet completely digitized the documents themselves. It's a big project, but inshallah, given support, we will be able to digitize our archives. So here we have taken some items from the archives for display to give an idea of the type of material and the variety that we have. So here, for example, is the minutes book of the Indigent Muslim Burial Fund, perhaps the first Muslim charity of Muslims in Britain, established around the mid-1920s, and they would pay for the burial of Muslims who had no family, who were destitute. And here we have an entry of a burial of someone called Musla Ali on Thursday, 9th of July, at the Brookwood Cemetery. So we have very rare minutes books of organizations. And then we also have correspondence which the mosque had with government departments. So for example, during the Second World War, there was food rationing, and here is a letter from the Jamiat Muslimeen, which was based at the East London Mosque, to the Ministry of Food, requesting extra items for the Eid celebration. Then we also have lots of private letters, personal letters sent to the Jamiat. Here is a letter, a very unusual letter, sent in 1941 from Ahmed Bennett. Ahmed Bennett was an English Muslim who embraced Islam, and he became the secretary of the Muslim Society of Great Britain for a short while. We also have a visitor's book from the right from the beginning when the mosque was opened. And here we have the signature of the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles, in our visitor's book. Just as an overview, I said there were about 100,000 documents. So they're all, maybe I would say 70% have been catalogued, and they're in proper boxes, in stacks. And there's an online catalogue, and the researcher can look at the online catalogue, make a request to the archivist, Sharia Begum, and she will bring out the documents at a mutually convenient time. So what we have, it's amazing how much information has been preserved. So apart from important things like governance documents, like annual reports, minutes of meetings, correspondence with ministries, dealings, interfaith dealings, there's also a lot of information which people would not normally keep. There are lots of utility bills going back to the 1940s, right? There are letters to London Transport, please arrange a bus stop by the mosque now. We have all the receipt books for fundraising going back to the 1950s. And, the East London community has never been a rich one. But you see the receipt books acknowledging a lady giving her bangles, giving small amounts of money. That's quite moving. So that record is preserved. Also, we have a very big collection of photographs. And recently I came across some pictures of Islamic Forum Europe from the early 1990s of some young lads putting together relief boxes for a cyclone in Bangladesh. Wow. And the very same young men are today trustees of the East London Mosque Trust. So you have that continuity. And I think generally, my overall impression is that what we have here is a history of socio-political activism. Right from the outset, through the 100 years, there's been a concern for both social work and for connecting Muslims to the Ummah. So in terms of social work, we have, even from 1940s, the Jamiat Muslimeen was concerned with setting up an education committee for children. Even before that, the Indigent Muslim Burial Fund was concerned with arranging burials for Muslims who died without any provisions and to save them from being thrown into a pauper's grave. So they set up a charity for that. And the whole effort of building a mosque is a social contribution. And at the political front, throughout, I think from the 1940s and 50s, there has been concern with the problems facing the Ummah generally. You have meetings by the Jamiat Muslimeen on Palestine, passing resolutions that, unless something is done, there's going to be a problem for the rest of the century, and how true this has been. So I would say that for any history of Muslim socio-political activism, the East London Mosque Archives are an essential resource.
No, that's really beautiful to hear, Dr. Jamil. And I think, one thing I personally find with East London Mosque that is very characteristic of its history, and even like how it's influenced today, is how much it's grounded by the community. Like it's a very kind of, you were mentioning there, this kind of, deep link to grassroots, deep link to social activism, deep link to the reality that exists outside of the walls of the mosque. And that's kind of embedded within not just the architecture, not just now with the archives, but with the whole kind of spirit or the entity of the mosque itself, which is really, really powerful. And for you personally, Dr. Jamil, is there a particular book or document or record in that archive that you find especially moving or significant?
Well, there's a lot. Apart from the Yusuf Ali letters, you can see when you look at his letters over a period of, say, 10 to 15 years, he was living alone in straitened circumstances, And you can see how his writing gradually deteriorates, become less and less legible. So you can see the decline of a scholar. That's very moving. And of course, I mean, there are other things of great interest to me. We have been able to acquire a collection of probably what was the first Muslim newspaper published by Muslims in London.
Wow.
It was first called the Muslim Standard, then the Islamic News, then Muslim Outlook. And this was just after the First World War, when the Greeks had invaded the Turkish mainland. There was the Khilafat movement to restore the authority of the Sultan. And Muslims across the world, and particularly in London, mobilized to defend the justices done to Turkey after the Great War. So we have that collection, and that is of particular interest to me because I have this. We have been writing about that period, but there's a lot more, you know.
Of course, it must be such a diverse range of materials, and perhaps there's even documents that maybe you are connected or people can connect with different periods of and different centuries. But that's so fascinating to hear about that period specifically, like around after the Second World War, even the First World War, and just the periods following that. And just kind of touching upon early beginnings, can you take us back to the very first mosque site in Commercial Road in the 1940s? And what did it look like, and how did organisations like the London Mosque Fund and Jamiat Muslimeen, which you mentioned earlier, make that possible?
Yes. So the initiative started in 1910 with someone called Sayyid Amir Ali, who was a retired judge from Calcutta who settled in London. And he was a brilliant organizer. He was also distinguished because he was the first Muslim Privy Councillor. So he set up the London Mosque Fund. And because immediately afterwards there was the First War, there were so many crises in the Muslim world. There was the Italian invasion of North Africa. There were the Balkan Wars in 1911. There was the First World War. The London Mosque Fund wasn't able to raise that many funds because it kept on diverting its funds to help soldiers, widows, and orphans. So by the time he died in 1928, there were perhaps about £5,000 or £6,000 only collected. So that money was with the London Mosque Fund. And then by the 1930s, there was like a growing community of merchants and tradesmen and warehousemen in East London, mainly from the Punjab. Also, some soldiers who had been in the First World War, so they had settled around East London. And there was also from the Docklands, there were the Lascars. There was a big community. So there was pressure on the London Mosque Fund to establish a mosque in East London, rather than follow their grand idea of a mosque in Westminster or some other prominent location. So what we had is a grassroots body emerged, which was called the Jamiat Muslimeen, headed by someone not from this area, but a very distinguished personality, a lawyer called Imdad Qazi. And the Jamiat Muslimeen put pressure on the Non-Mosque Fund to acquire some properties in the East End. So the Jamiat Muslimeen then went house hunting. They went to some places, the offers fell through. Then they found 3 terraced houses on Commercial Road, 446, 448, and 450. It was complicated because they had different landlords. 450 was a cafe. Eventually they were able to buy, the London Mosque Fund was able to buy the 3 properties. And again, thanks to the chair of the London Mosque Fund at the time, who was Hassan Sohrawardi, also with connections with Bengal. And though he was associated with the India office, with government, his heart was in this project, and he helped the Jamiat Muslimeen to acquire those 3 terraced properties. So by 1940, we had the East London Mosque, we had Jummah prayers. Then there was the war, Second World War, and bombs were falling on London. And a bomb fell on 350, damaging the roof. Okay, so some of the Jamiat Muslim records were lost, but yet enough were preserved for us to keep in our archive. So really, we are quite lucky and quite fortunate to have preserved some of the documents. And in the records of the Jamiat Muslimin, you see how they tried to recreate their membership list because they said we had lost that. So then what happened was the properties on Commercial Road eventually were taken over by the GLA. There was a demolition order. And as part of that, what I was referring to smart leadership, the chair of the committee then at the time was Suleiman Jetta, and he negotiated a piece of land on Fieldgate Street and Whitechapel Road in exchange. So there were protracted negotiations, but they managed. And eventually, that's why we are here today. So first there was a porter cabin. I don't know whether you probably haven't seen, but there was a porter cabin, and that's where the madrasa was held. Then there was the first building of the East London Mosque, and then gradually it expanded to the London Muslim Centre and the Mariam Centre. But all of this has not been without a struggle. You know, the activists had to lobby councillors, they had to lobby MPs, they had to fight property developers who wanted to build luxury flats on the London ELMC site. So it required a lot of mobilization, a lot of effort, a lot of organization to get where we are. So really we should acknowledge what has happened in the past.
And that struggle is, very, very real. And like you're saying, Dr. Jamil, it's really important that we kind of continue to highlight that. And, you know, it's such a kind of, you know, communal effort to kind of build a place like a mosque. And like you were saying there, the struggles that they would have probably had to kind of endure, you know, shouldn't be forgotten, and it should be upheld. And kind of maybe touching that a bit more and focusing on a bit more on that, the challenges and the resistance. London went through huge destruction during the Second World War, and you mentioned, you know, a bomb fell on one of the roofs of the buildings in Commercial Road.
Yes.
Yeah. How did some of the early records manage to survive?
Yes. So of course some records survived the bombing.
Mm-hmm.
And then some records were held by the secretary or the treasurer of the London Mosque Fund, Sir John Woodhead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Sir John Woodhead was a very experienced civil servant, and he kept meticulous records. Mm-hmm. So I think some were kept by him at his office. Mm-hmm. And others, I think when, you know, we were going through earlier about how the records were brought together from the roof of the East London Mosque and so on. And some of the records were in old Boots paper bags.
Wow.
So people kept them. Luckily, they didn't throw them away. So that's how they were brought together. And you know, I think I would like to, at this point, maybe best to acknowledge some of the names. You know, we mentioned Suleiman Jetta,
Yep.
who was associated with Islamic work in the East End from 1940s to 1990s. He was one of the chairs of the East London Mosque Trust when the new mosque was opened. So you can imagine 40 to 50 years of community service. And there's a story, when he was towards the end of his days, he was diabetic and he couldn't see, right? But he knew the way from Aldgate Station to East London Mosque, and with his white stick, he would find his way, and he'd still sit on his desk, right, and make a list of things to be done that day. So there are people like that. And so apart from Suleiman Jetta, Sir John Woodhead, and in fact, Sir John Woodhead mentored Suleiman Jetta when Suleiman Jetta was a young man.
Yeah.
So we know we also owe a lot to people of goodwill in the wider community, like John Woodhead. And then there was two other names I'd like to mention. There's Halim Salahuddin, who was instrumental in the new archive strong room, and he was a treasurer of the East London Mosque Trust. He was also a chair of the Indigent Muslim Burial Fund. And again, we have a long record of community service, from his being a schoolboy in the early 60s to he died recently, a few years ago. May subhanallah bless him. And then, of course, amongst us now, we have Chaudhry Muinuddin, who, the story goes, he visited Suleiman Jetta when in old age and retrieved paper bags from his attic and brought them here to the East London Mosque. So these are some of the big names we have, and there may be others which we owe a debt to, which we don't know. We have to look into the archives.
For sure. And kind of maybe touching on the history, and it would be great to hear your insight, Dr. Jamil, on this. And among the oldest records in the minutes books from 1910, what's recorded in it, and who were some of the key people involved in those early efforts to establish a mosque in London?
Yes. So the first minutes go back to 1910, and it met regularly, and we have beautiful handwritten records who the attendees were. And usually the first meetings were chaired by Sayyid Amir Ali, and you had other people attending. Now, one of the names which interests me about the early attendees was an Ottoman called Halil Halim, or Khalid Halim. Sorry, Halil Khalid, to be right. So he collaborated with Sayyid Amir Ali, and he traveled to Egypt and to Turkey to raise funds for a mosque in London. Wow. And it is interesting that he was quite concerned. He said, look, there are Lascars living in East London, and they are, falling by the wayside. What is happening to mixed marriages? What's happening to children? So he had that social conscience. So there's people like Halim Khalid. There is later on there's Lord Lamington, another person of goodwill who helped the work of the Indigenous Muslim Burial Fund and the London Mosque Fund. There are diplomats throughout, because initially it was the diplomats who would send their ambassador to attend the London Mosque meetings. And then gradually it became more and more a community-based committee.
That's really interesting. So it kind of moved from kind of dignitaries and kind of, if I may use the term, of kind of more those that are in the spheres of the political realm, and that kind of moved gradually to more the grassroots realm, or at least maybe that was always kind of existing, but then maybe there may have perhaps been more leaning on one realm to the other realm. But you mentioned the Indigenous Muslim Burial Fund a few times in the podcast already, Dr. Jamil, but what includes in this burial fund minutes book, for instance?
Right. So what we have, apart from who are the sponsors and the trustees, and very prominent among them was the Aga Khan. And the Aga Khan, in fact, also donated annually to the London Mosque Fund. Wow. So he was a supporter. But what I found very interesting are the register of burials. And for example, in 1925, you have the burial of somebody, Musleh Ali, and you have a lady with a Muslim name also being buried. And that was and the London Mosque Fund supported the Indigenous Muslim Burial Fund in buying a plot of land in Brookwood. So there was a plot of land, and later on, this is also interesting how the past continues to the present. The Indigenous Muslim Burial Fund then bought land in Gardens of Peace, and they have plots there to help the Muslims who cannot afford their own burial. So you have these names, and you wonder, how come they ended up in that situation? Because at the time, the pauper's grave was quite horrendous. A pit would be dug and bodies would just be thrown in without any religious rites. And people like Amir Ali and the Aga Khan and their network felt that something had to be done. They were all quite well off. They didn't have to do anything, but they had this sense of fellow feeling for their co-religionists.
And that I think strikes me a lot through this conversation, Dr. Jamil, about this, whether that be Muslims or, as you're mentioning, people of goodwill. There's this kind of expansion, this empathy, this real understanding that might not be as prevalent in today's society as it was in the past, but of connecting to others and understanding of helping not just yourself but the people around you, and that might be seen in the leaders that you mentioned, Suleiman Jetta and Halim Salahuddin, and the other figures that you mentioned. But is there any other figures, Dr. Jamil, that you feel that we need to mention in this story of the ELM Archives?
Well, thank you very much, Nathan, for that, because there was one name which I should have mentioned earlier, and it is still very closely connected with the London Mosque Fund, which is the Taslim Ali funerals. So Haji Taslim Ali was appointed as a supervisor of the old East London Mosque, and he had a remarkable wife, Haja Maryam, and in fact they ran a soup kitchen, then for the down and out. And Haji Taslim Ali, he was a successful entrepreneur, but he found his vocation in doing the funeral work. He said he had a dream. He said he was for a while. This is interesting. He said for a while he was working in Mecca or Medina, and he had a dream that you had to do something for the community. Wow. And he came back, and that's what he did for his lifetime, and later his son Guillaume has taken over, and their other relatives. So I think Haji Taslim Ali's death is also quite important. And they ran a school from the old mosque. And I have met relatives who said that he would go out in his van and pick up the kids and bring them back home. So he had that mission to provide religious instruction to children. So Haji Taslim Ali is someone we should honor as well.
And there's so many people in this, and like you mentioned previously, Dr. Jamil, I'm sure like going through the archives, there's so many individuals that, have dedicated their lives to not just necessarily, the Muslim community, but probably the kind of surrounding community of Whitechapel and maybe other areas in London as well. But looking ahead, as the archive grows, and what kind of new materials are being added, and how do you see researchers and students and the wider community making use of it in years to come? And just if you could just detail, Dr. Jamil, what kind of plans are ahead in regards to the archives?
Okay, so we are quite ambitious in what we would like to do. I think we have here the possibility of building a British Muslim history resource center based on the nucleus we have from the East London Mosque. And also, because the East London Mosque Trust and the Jamiat had correspondence with other Muslim organizations in other towns and cities like Cardiff, often our archives are the only place where we have any remaining information about them, because they have gone, they've faded away. So it's quite important. And also, we have been given some very rare deposits. So, I think I mentioned Yusuf Ali and Pictol were both associated with the mosque. So we've been given deposits about Pictol from private researchers, from his biographer. So we are building up a collection of 20th century English translators of the Quran. Wow. So we have a very good deposit on Yusuf Ali. We have his scrapbook from the 1940s, which is very rare. We have Pictol's letters to the London Mosque Fund. We have Pictol's private photographs as a child from his researcher. We even have a manuscript of one of his books. We have letters with correspondence between Jetta and Muhammad Asad. We have correspondence with Jetta and Professor Hamidullah in Paris. So we can build up quite an important resource on 20th century scholars of the Quran. And also, I think our vision is to set up a scholars area in the archive office where we can keep our rare books, which I can show you some of them. We've been gifted some very rare books on Ottoman history and general on historical subjects, which we want to keep there for scholars to refer to as a reference library. We want to expand our archive office with more facilities to accommodate at least a couple of researchers at the same time. So that's where we would like to go.
No, fantastic. And I pray Allah gives you success in that, Dr. Jamil, and all the archives team. And finally, before we conclude, if someone was listening, Dr. Jamil, whether a researcher, student, or member of the public, and wanted to visit the archives, what do they need to do, and is the archives open for everyone to access?
So the process is to visit a website called the Archive Hub, look at the catalogue, and there are instructions on who to contact to make an appointment. Mm-hmm. Then the archivist, Shahira Begum, will respond with a mutually convenient time. Also on East London Mosque website, there are further details on the archive.
Fantastic. And it's just been really an honour to sit here with you, Dr. Jamil, and listen about not just the projects, the archives at East London Mosque, but the history of the mosque, and learning about all the variety of documents and the variety of people, and really inspiring figures. And I just pray that the work continues to grow, and there's so much benefit in this. And it's just an honor to be with you and have this podcast so other people and the wider community can learn about the archive. So thank you so much, Dr. Jamil, and thank you.
Jazakallah khairan, Nathan. Thank you so much.